The marble floors of Prestige Plaza gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, their polished surface reflecting the soft golden light that bathed the most exclusive shopping center in the city. It was 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of time when the lunch crowd had thinned out and the serious shoppers emerged, women in designer handbags and men in tailored suits who moved through the corridors with the quiet confidence that comes from never having to check price tags. Dr. Angela Richardson stepped through the main entrance, her heels clicking softly against the Italian marble as she paused to orient herself. At 38, she carried herself with the poise of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room she entered. Her navy blue blazer was perfectly tailored, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist that had taken her stylist an hour to perfect that morning. The diamond wedding ring on her left hand caught the light as she adjusted the strap of her leather handbag, a gift from her husband for their 10th anniversary. She had exactly 90 minutes before her next appointment, and she intended to use every minute of it. The jewelry store on the 3rd level had called yesterday to confirm that the custom piece she'd commissioned was ready for pickup. A surprise for James, something special to commemorate his recent committee appointment. After 15 years in the Senate, her husband still got excited about new opportunities to serve, and Angela loved finding ways to celebrate his passion for public service. But as Angela began walking toward the escalators, she was unaware that her presence had already been noted by someone whose worldview couldn't accommodate the sight of a black woman moving confidently through spaces he'd mentally reserved for others. Brad Mitchell had been working security at Prestige Plaza for 8 years, and in his mind, those 8 years had made him an expert at reading people. At 42, he stood 6 feet tall, with a kind of build that came from weekend gym sessions and too much fast food, strong enough to intimidate, soft enough around the middle to suggest he'd never been tested. His uniform was always pressed, his badge polished, and his radio positioned prominently on his shoulder where everyone could see it. Brad took pride in what he called his instincts. He could spot trouble from across the mall, could identify the teenagers who were planning to shoplift, could sense when someone didn't belong in the upscale environment of Prestige Plaza. At least, that's how he explained it to himself. Others might have called it profiling, but Brad preferred to think of it as experience. And right now, his experience was telling him that the black woman who'd just walked through the main entrance was trouble. She was too confident, too comfortable, too present. In Brad's 8 years at the plaza, he developed an internal catalog of who belonged and who didn't. The wives of executives, the daughters of oil company CEOs, the politicians' families who occasionally graced the stores with their presence. They all had a certain look, a certain way of moving through space that announced their right to be there. This woman had that same confidence, but something about it set Brad's teeth on edge. Maybe it was the way she didn't look around nervously like the black customers who usually shopped here, the ones who seemed to expect trouble and were grateful when they didn't find it. This woman acted like she owned the place, and that attitude rubbed Brad wrong in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "Control, this is Brad," he spoke quietly into his radio, his eyes tracking Angela as she approached the escalators. "I've got a possible situation developing. Black female, mid-30s, designer clothing. She's moving like she knows where she's going, but something feels off." "Copy that, Brad," came the response from the Central Security Office. "What's your assessment?" Brad watched as Angela stepped onto the escalator, her posture straight and her gaze forward. Could be casing the jewelry stores. The confidence feels rehearsed, you know? Like she's trying too hard to blend in. "I'm going to keep an eye on her." The truth was, Angela's confidence didn't feel rehearsed at all. It felt natural, earned, authentic. And that's exactly what bothered Brad. In his worldview, there were people who belonged in places like Prestige Plaza and people who didn't, and the lines were clearly drawn. When someone crossed those lines too easily, too naturally, it disrupted the order of things that made Brad feel secure in his role as gatekeeper. Angela reached the 2nd level and paused to check the directory. She was looking for Meridian Jewelers, the boutique establishment that specialized in custom pieces for discerning clients. The store had been recommended by her friend Caroline, whose husband served on the House Ways and Means Committee. "They understand discretion," Caroline had said with a knowing smile. "Perfect for political families who prefer to keep their personal business private." As Angela studied the directory, Brad positioned himself near a pillar about 20 feet away, pretending to check his phone while keeping her in his peripheral vision. He noted the way other shoppers moved around her without giving her a second glance, the way the staff at the nearby boutiques smiled and nodded as she passed. None of it should have seemed suspicious to a reasonable observer. But reasonable wasn't a word that applied to Brad's assessment of the situation. In his mind, Angela's seamless integration into the environment was itself evidence of deception. Real customers who belonged here didn't have to work at fitting in. It came naturally because they'd been raised in these spaces. The fact that Angela seemed so comfortable could only mean she was very good at whatever game she was playing. "She's checking the directory now," Brad reported into his radio. "Taking her time, like she's memorizing the layout. Definitely casing the place." Angela found the listing for Meridian Jewelers and smiled. Third level, West Wing, just where Caroline had said it would be. She had enough time to pick up James's gift and perhaps browse the new collection at Saks before heading to her next commitment. The afternoon was shaping up perfectly. She moved toward the escalator to the third level, unaware that Brad was now following at a discreet distance, his hand resting casually on the radio clipped to his shoulder. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a security guard making his routine rounds. But Brad's focus was entirely on Angela, his suspicions growing with each step she took. The third level of Prestige Plaza was even more exclusive than the floors below. The stores here catered to clients who made appointments rather than browsing, who worked with personal shoppers and had their purchases delivered rather than carried. The lighting was softer, the carpeting plush, and the atmosphere designed to make wealthy customers feel pampered and protected. Angela walked confidently down the corridor toward Meridian Jewelers, her reflection following her in the polished surfaces of the storefront windows. She passed a couple examining watches at Cartier, a woman trying on scarves at Hermes, and an elderly gentleman in conversation with a gallery owner about a particular painting. Everyone moved with the unhurried pace of people who could afford to take their time. Brad maintained his distance, but close enough to observe. He watched as Angela paused outside Meridian Jewelers, checking something on her phone before approaching the door. The store's entrance was marked only by an elegant script sign and a small placard indicating that visits were by appointment only. "She's at the jewelry store now," Brad whispered into his radio. "High-end place, appointment only. She's definitely planning something." Angela pushed open the door to Meridian Jewelers, and a soft chime announced her arrival. The interior was more like a private salon than a retail store. Cream-colored walls, soft classical music, and discreet lighting that made the jewelry displays glow like captured stars. Behind the main counter, a distinguished man in his 60s looked up with a welcoming smile. "Dr. Richardson," he said warmly, coming around the counter to greet her. "How wonderful to see you again. I trust the senator is well." "He's doing wonderfully. Thank you for asking, Mr. Hendricks," Angela replied, accepting his offered handshake. "I hope you have good news about the commission piece." "Indeed I do," Hendricks beamed, his eyes lighting up with the satisfaction of a craftsman proud of his work. "If I may say so, it's one of the finest pieces we've created this year. The engraving work alone took our master jeweler 3 weeks to complete." Brad had positioned himself where he could see through the store's front window, though he couldn't hear the conversation inside. What he could see was Angela being greeted like a valued customer, being treated with the kind of respect reserved for the store's most important clients. But instead of reassuring him that his suspicions were unfounded, the warm reception only convinced him that Angela was running a sophisticated con game. "She's good," he muttered into his radio. "Really good. She's got them completely fooled. They're treating her like she's some kind of VIP." Inside the store, Mr. Hendricks disappeared into the back room and returned with a small velvet box. "I think you'll find this exceeds your expectations," he said, opening the box to reveal a pair of custom cufflinks. Each piece was crafted from white gold and featured the seal of the United States Senate, with James's initials elegantly engraved on the reverse. Small diamonds marked the points of the stars, and the craftsmanship was exquisite. Angela's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "They're absolutely perfect," she said, imagining James's expression when he opened the gift. "He's going to love them." "The senator has excellent taste in jewelry," Hendricks said with a knowing smile, "almost as excellent as his taste in wives." Angela laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You're a shameless flatterer, Mr. Hendricks. But I'll take the compliment." As they completed the transaction, Angela's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her assistant. Reminder: board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Traffic is heavy on Connecticut Avenue. Angela checked her watch. She had enough time, but she'd need to wrap up her shopping trip soon. The quarterly board meeting for the Children's Hospital, where she served as chairwoman, was one commitment she never missed. The new pediatric wing project was at a critical stage, and they needed her vote to approve the final construction contracts. "Mr. Hendricks, I'm afraid I need to head out soon," Angela said as she signed the receipt. "But thank you again for the exceptional work." "It's always our pleasure, Dr. Richardson. Please give our regards to the senator." Angela tucked the small box into her handbag and headed for the door. As she stepped back into the corridor, she noticed a security guard standing near a planter, apparently checking his phone. Something about his posture seemed focused, alert in a way that suggested he wasn't just casually browsing social media. Brad saw her emerge from the jewelry store and immediately spoke into his radio. "She's out of the store. Whatever she just did in there, it worked. They're treating her like she's legitimate." "Brad, are you sure about this?" came the voice from Central Security. "Maybe she is legitimate. If the store staff knows her." "Trust me, I know trouble when I see it," Brad interrupted. "She's running some kind of long con. Probably has fake references, stolen identity, the whole setup. These high-end scammers are getting more sophisticated every year." Angela began walking toward the Saks Fifth Avenue entrance, unaware that she was being followed and assessed by someone who had already decided she was guilty of something. In Brad's mind, every aspect of her behavior was being filtered through his preconceptions. Her confidence became arrogance. Her familiarity with the store staff became evidence of deception. Her expensive clothing and jewelry became props in an elaborate fraud. The afternoon was about to take a turn that neither Angela nor Brad could have anticipated. She was simply a successful woman going about her day, picking up a gift for her husband and preparing for a board meeting that would benefit sick children. He was a security guard whose prejudices had created a threat where none existed, whose need to maintain what he saw as the natural order was about to put him on a collision course with someone who had far more power than he could possibly imagine. But before we see how this routine shopping trip became a career-ending nightmare for Brad Mitchell, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Stories like this expose the reality of everyday racism and what happens when someone finally has the authority to fight back. The humiliation this security guard was about to put this woman through was absolutely shocking. But what happened when she revealed who she really was will leave you speechless. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. So stick around for the most satisfying karma you've ever witnessed. As Angela approached the entrance to Saks, she was thinking about the board meeting agenda and whether the construction timeline would allow them to open the new wing before the holidays. She was thinking about James's reaction to his gift and whether she'd have time to stop by the grocery store on her way home. She wasn't thinking about the security guard who was convinced she was a criminal or the confrontation that was building like a storm cloud behind her. She had no idea that her next few minutes would test everything she believed about dignity, justice, and the power of maintaining grace under pressure. But Brad Mitchell was about to learn a lesson about assumptions, about prejudice, and about what happens when you mistake someone's calm confidence for weakness. He was about to discover that not every black woman in an expensive store was someone he could intimidate or humiliate. Some of them had husbands who wrote the laws that governed his profession. Some of them had the power to ensure that what was about to happen would never happen to anyone else. Angela Richardson was about to become one of those women. Angela had just stepped into the refined atmosphere of Saks Fifth Avenue when she heard the footsteps behind her change pace. What had been the casual rhythm of someone walking through a mall suddenly became more purposeful, more focused. She paused near a display of designer handbags, her instincts, honed by years of navigating political environments where threats could come from any direction, telling her that something had shifted in the space around her. "Excuse me, ma'am," came a voice from behind her, carrying just enough authority to make other shoppers glance in their direction. Angela turned to see Brad Mitchell approaching, his security uniform crisp and his badge prominently displayed. His expression was what she'd learned to recognize as professional suspicion, the look worn by people who'd already decided you were guilty of something but were going through the motions of giving you a chance to explain. "Yes," Angela replied, her voice calm and polite. She'd dealt with overzealous security before, though usually in government buildings where her face was recognized and the encounters ended quickly with apologetic nods. Brad stopped about 3 feet away, close enough to establish his authority, but far enough to avoid seeming overtly aggressive. It was a practiced distance, one he'd perfected over 8 years of confronting people he deemed suspicious. "I'm Brad Mitchell, head of security for this section of the plaza," he said, though his actual title was simply security officer, and he had no authority over any particular section. "I couldn't help but notice you've been moving through the mall with some purpose. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay." Angela's eyebrows rose slightly. In her world, a world of Senate committee meetings and diplomatic functions, people didn't approach strangers with vague questions about their purpose, unless they were fishing for something specific. "Everything's fine, thank you," she replied, her tone remaining pleasant, but with an undercurrent that suggested the conversation should probably end there. "I'm just doing some shopping." Brad nodded, but his eyes were scanning Angela from head to toe, taking inventory of her clothing, her jewelry, her handbag. Everything looked expensive, legitimate, but that only reinforced his theory that she was running a sophisticated operation. "Shopping for anything in particular?" he asked, pulling out a small notepad, another prop designed to make his questioning seem official. "We've had some issues lately with people using stolen credit cards, identity theft, that sort of thing. Just doing some routine follow-up." The lie rolled off his tongue smoothly. There had been no recent issues with credit card fraud, no directive to question customers, no routine anything. Brad was freelancing, operating on nothing more than his own biases and the authority his uniform seemed to give him. Angela felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced as a teenager when store clerks followed her through department stores, as a college student when professors questioned whether she'd written her own papers, as a young professional when colleagues assumed she was someone's assistant rather than their peer. "I picked up a custom jewelry piece," she said, her voice still controlled, but with an edge of steel creeping in. "From Meridian Jewelers. They can verify my appointment if you'd like to check." Brad made a show of writing something in his notepad. "Custom jewelry, you said? That's pretty expensive. Mind if I ask what line of work you're in?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Angela could feel other shoppers slowing their pace, sensing the tension building between the well-dressed black woman and the white security guard with his notepad and official demeanor. "I work in healthcare administration," Angela replied, which was technically true. Her position as chairwoman of the Children's Hospital Board involved extensive administrative oversight. "And I'm not sure why my profession is relevant to your security concerns." Brad's jaw tightened at the subtle challenge in her tone. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone he'd already categorized as a problem. In his experience, legitimate customers were grateful for security attention, apologetic for any inconvenience, eager to prove they belonged. "Look, ma'am," Brad said, his voice taking on the harder edge he used when suspects weren't showing proper deference. "I'm just trying to do my job here. We've had some sophisticated theft rings operating in this area, people who dress the part, act like they belong. I'm sure you can understand why I need to be thorough." Angela felt the familiar calculation running through her mind, the same mental math that every successful black professional learned to do. How much dignity was she willing to sacrifice to avoid escalation? How far was she willing to push back before this became something that could spiral beyond her control? "Officer Mitchell," she said, reading his name tag with deliberate emphasis, "I appreciate that you're doing your job, but I've done nothing suspicious, I've broken no laws, and I'm not required to justify my presence in a public shopping center to you or anyone else." The words hit Brad like a slap across the face. This woman, this suspect, was lecturing him about what she was or wasn't required to do. She was asserting rights and speaking with the kind of confidence that suggested she thought she was his equal. That was about to change. Brad's face flushed red as Angela's words sank in. In 8 years of security work, he'd never had anyone, let alone a black woman, speak to him with such casual dismissal of his authority. The way she said Officer Mitchell with that slight emphasis, as if she were correcting a child who'd overstepped his bounds, made his blood pressure spike. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to the security office," Brad said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he'd learned from watching police procedurals. "We need to verify your story about this jewelry purchase." Angela's eyes narrowed. She'd been patient, professional, even accommodating up to this point. But being ordered to follow a security guard to some back office for the crime of shopping while Black crossed a line she wasn't willing to let anyone push her past. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said firmly. "I haven't committed any crime, and you have no authority to detain me." The word detain hit Brad like cold water. It was a legal term, the kind of word that suggested this woman knew something about law enforcement procedures. Most people he confronted were intimidated by his uniform and badge, eager to comply with whatever he demanded. This woman was speaking like someone who understood her rights. "Look, lady," Brad said, abandoning any pretense of professionalism, "I've been doing this job for 8 years. I know trouble when I see it, and right now, I'm looking at trouble. You can either cooperate or I can call the real police and let them sort this out." A small crowd was beginning to gather. 3 teenage girls with shopping bags had stopped to watch, their phones already out and recording. An elderly couple paused near the jewelry counter, the woman whispering urgently to her husband. A store employee, a young black woman behind the cosmetics counter, watched with growing concern as the situation escalated. Angela felt the familiar weight of representation settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just Dr. Angela Richardson anymore. She was every black woman who'd ever been profiled, questioned, or humiliated in spaces where they had every right to be. Every choice she made in the next few minutes would be scrutinized, analyzed, and probably broadcast across social media. "Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority she'd developed through years of chairing contentious board meetings, "I want to be very clear about something. I have not shoplifted. I have not committed any crime. I am a paying customer who has done nothing except exist in a space where you apparently believe I don't belong." Brad's hand moved instinctively to his radio. "Control, this is Brad. I need backup at Saks, main level. I've got a non-compliant individual who's refusing to cooperate with a security investigation." The radio crackled back immediately. "Brad, what's the nature of the incident?" "Suspected theft, possible credit card fraud," Brad replied, the lies flowing so easily now that he almost believed them himself. "Subject is being argumentative and uncooperative." Angela felt her phone buzz in her purse. Without breaking eye contact with Brad, she reached for it, noting how his hand immediately moved toward his radio again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Brad warned. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The teenager with the phone recording gasped audibly. "Oh my God," she whispered to her friends, "he's treating her like a criminal." Angela held up her phone where Brad could see it. "I'm calling my husband," she said calmly. "Unless you're planning to deny me that right as well." Brad's mind raced. Most shoplifters, scammers, and troublemakers didn't have husbands they wanted to call. They didn't speak with calm authority or use words like detain and rights. They didn't stand their ground when faced with security personnel and threats of police involvement. But he'd gone too far to back down now. His backup was coming, witnesses were watching, and his authority was on the line. In Brad's world, backing down from a confrontation with someone he'd already identified as a problem would be seen as weakness. "Make it quick," he said, though he had no legal authority to limit her phone calls. "And keep it on speaker so I can hear what you're saying." Angela's finger hovered over her husband's contact information. James was probably in his office, maybe in a committee meeting or briefing with staff. She could call him, explain the situation, and have this resolved within minutes. A few words about who she was married to, and Brad Mitchell would probably be escorted from the building by his own supervisors. But doing that would mean using her husband's position to solve a problem that shouldn't exist in the first place. It would mean that the next black woman who shopped at Prestige Plaza without a senator for a husband would face the same treatment, with no recourse and no protection. Angela Richardson made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling her husband, she scrolled to a different contact in her phone. "Actually," she said, looking directly into Brad's eyes, "I think I'll call someone else first." The sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the marble floor as 2 additional security guards approached the growing scene at Saks. Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of mall security, arrived first, his experienced eyes immediately taking in the situation. A well-dressed black woman standing calmly while Brad Mitchell paced like a caged animal. A growing crowd of onlookers with phones pointed in their direction, and the unmistakable tension that preceded either de-escalation or disaster. Behind Webb came Jenny Chun, barely 6 months out of security training, her face showing the uncertainty of someone who'd never encountered a situation quite like this. She'd heard Brad's radio calls about suspected theft and uncooperative subjects, but what she saw in front of her looked more like a customer service dispute than a criminal matter. "What's the situation, Brad?" Webb asked, though his tone carried the weariness of someone who'd cleaned up Brad's messes before. "Suspected shoplifter," Brad replied, his voice louder than necessary, as if volume could make his accusations more credible. "She claims she bought jewelry from Meridian, but she's being evasive about her background, refusing to cooperate with standard security protocols." Angela looked at Webb with the measured gaze of someone assessing whether she was dealing with reasonable authority or more of the same prejudice. "Officer Webb," she said, reading his name tag, "I purchased a custom piece from Meridian Jewelers 20 minutes ago. I have the receipt, the store staff can verify my appointment, and I've committed no crime. Your colleague here seems to believe that my presence in this mall is inherently suspicious." Webb's expression tightened. In 20 years of security work, he'd learned to read situations, and nothing about this woman suggested criminal activity. Her composure, her vocabulary, her willingness to provide verifiable information, it all pointed to someone who was exactly what she appeared to be, a legitimate customer being harassed. "Brad," Webb said quietly, "maybe we should just verify her story with the store and—" "I already told you, Marcus," Brad interrupted, his frustration bleeding through his professional facade. "She's running a sophisticated con. The fact that they treated her like a regular customer just proves how good she is at this. These people study the system, they know how to work it." The phrase, "these people," landed like a physical blow in the space around them. Webb winced visibly, recognizing the racial undertone that Brad had just broadcast to everyone within earshot. Jenny Chin took a small step backward, suddenly understanding that she was witnessing something that could end careers. Angela felt her phone vibrate with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and saw her assistant's name, probably calling about the board meeting she was supposed to attend in less than an hour. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being detained as a suspected criminal, while a room full of hospital board members waited for her to arrive and approve funding for a new pediatric wing. "I need to take this call," Angela said, holding up her phone. "It's about a meeting I'm supposed to chair in 45 minutes. "No calls," Brad said immediately. "You can make all the calls you want after we sort this out." Webb looked at Brad with growing alarm. "Brad, she has a right to." "I'm handling this, Marcus," Brad snapped. "I've got 8 years of experience dealing with these situations. I know what I'm doing." But even as Brad spoke, his confidence was beginning to crack. The woman in front of him wasn't behaving like any shoplifter or scammer he'd ever encountered. She wasn't nervous, wasn't making excuses, wasn't trying to leave. Instead, she stood there with the kind of calm authority that suggested she was accustomed to being in control of difficult situations. Angela made her decision. She scrolled through her contacts and found the number she was looking for. Not her husband's office, but someone else entirely. Someone whose response would send a very different kind of message. "I'm calling my attorney," she announced, her finger hovering over the contact for David Chun, senior partner at Morrison, Chun and Associates, one of the most prominent civil rights law firms in the city. David had been a friend since law school, had attended her wedding, and had handled several high-profile discrimination cases that had resulted in seven-figure settlements. The words "my attorney" seemed to hit Brad like cold water. In his experience, guilty people didn't immediately offer to call lawyers. They made excuses, tried to negotiate, promised to never come back if he'd just let them go. Innocent people, especially innocent people with resources, called attorneys. "Ma'am, there's no need to involve lawyers," Webb said quickly, sensing the situation spiraling beyond any reasonable control. "If you could just show us your receipt from Meridian, we can clear this up right now." Angela looked at Webb with something approaching sympathy. He seemed genuinely concerned about finding a reasonable resolution, unlike his colleague who appeared committed to proving she was guilty of something regardless of evidence. "Officer Webb, I'd be happy to show you my receipt," she said, reaching into her purse. "But I want you to understand that this situation has moved far beyond a simple verification process. Your colleague has accused me of theft, demanded I submit to questioning without cause, and threatened to have me arrested for the crime of shopping while black." The receipt she pulled from her purse was printed on Meridian's distinctive letterhead, complete with the store's authentication codes and Mr. Hendrick's signature. The timestamp showed her purchase had occurred exactly 23 minutes earlier, and the item description matched what she told them. Custom cufflinks, Senator collection, 18K white gold with diamond accents. Webb examined the receipt, his face showing the resignation of someone who'd just confirmed what he'd already suspected. "This looks completely legitimate, Brad. She's telling the truth." But Brad's response wasn't relief or apology. Instead, his face darkened with an emotion that looked disturbingly like rage. "Anyone can fake a receipt," he said, though the accusation sounded desperate even to his own ears. "High-end scammers forge documentation all the time. We need to call the store, verify the serial numbers, check her credit history." Brad stopped. Webb's voice carried the authority of 20 years and countless situations exactly like this one. "Just stop. This woman is a legitimate customer, and you're turning a non-incident into a potential lawsuit." Angela's phone rang again, David Chun returning her missed call. She looked at the 3 security guards, at the growing crowd of onlookers, at the teenagers still recording everything on their phones. "Excuse me," she said, answering the call. "David? Yes, I'm fine, but I need you to listen carefully. I'm being detained by mall security at Prestige Plaza for suspected shoplifting. No, I haven't been arrested, but they're refusing to let me leave despite having proof of purchase." Brad felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he listened to half of a conversation that was about to destroy his world. This wasn't some street scammer calling a fake lawyer. This was a real conversation with real legal counsel, and it was being recorded by at least 6 different phones. Angela continued her call, her voice carrying clearly across the marble atrium. "Yes, David, I want this documented. And yes, I think we should discuss federal civil rights violations." The words federal civil rights violations seemed to echo in the space around them. Webb's face went pale. Jenny Chin looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. And Brad Mitchell, for the first time since this encounter began, started to understand that he might have made the biggest mistake of his career. The conversation with David Chun continued as Angela put the call on speaker, her voice carrying across the increasingly crowded atrium of Prestige Plaza. By now, at least 20 people had gathered to watch the confrontation, their phones creating a constellation of recording lights that would ensure every word of what happened next would be preserved forever. "David, I want you to hear this directly from the security officers," Angela said, holding her phone toward Brad. "Officer Mitchell, would you please explain to my attorney exactly what crime you believe I've committed?" Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. With a civil rights attorney listening on speakerphone and multiple cameras recording, the lies that had flowed so easily just minutes before now seemed to stick in his throat. We had reports of suspicious activity," Brad stammered. Someone matching her description was seen casing the jewelry stores." "What reports?" Webb interjected, his voice sharp with alarm. Brad, we haven't had any reports of suspicious activity today. The contradiction hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. David Chen's voice came through the phone speaker with the clinical precision of someone who'd prosecuted dozens of discrimination cases. Officer Mitchell, are you saying you detained my client based on false reports? And what specifically about Dr. Richardson's appearance made her match this alleged description? Dr. Richardson. The title hit Brad like a physical blow. This wasn't just some random shopper. This was a doctor, a professional, someone with credentials and connections and the kind of resources that could make his life very complicated. Look, I don't know anything about any doctor, Brad said desperately. She never told me she was a doctor. She was acting suspicious, wouldn't answer questions about how she could afford. How she could afford what? Angela interrupted, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. How exactly does someone afford to shop, Officer Mitchell? And what about my appearance? Suggested I couldn't afford to make legitimate purchases. The question trapped Brad in the exact place Angela intended. Any answer he gave would reveal the racial assumptions that had driven his entire approach to this encounter. The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing they were witnessing something significant unfold. I never said anything about race, Brad protested weakly. This has nothing to do with. Officer Mitchell, came a new voice from behind the crowd. Step away from Dr. Richardson immediately. Everyone turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit approaching with quick, purposeful strides. His face was a mask of controlled fury, and his presence seemed to change the entire energy of the space around them. Behind him walked two other men, their bearing and alertness marking them unmistakably as security personnel. Angela felt a mixture of relief and resignation as her husband approached. She'd wanted to handle this situation herself, to prove that she didn't need political protection to defend her rights. But James Richardson had apparently received word of what was happening and decided that some battles were too important to fight alone. Senator Richardson, Webb breathed, recognition dawning on his face as he realized exactly who was approaching. Sir, I want to assure you that we're handling this situation. You're handling it? James Richardson's voice cut through the space like a blade. You call having 3 security guards detain my wife for the crime of shopping handling the situation? The silence that followed was so complete that Angela could hear her own heartbeat. Brad's face had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a pale gray that suggested he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. You're your wife, Brad whispered. Dr. Angela Richardson, James said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in the United States Senate, is the chairwoman of Children's Hospital Board of Directors, holds a doctorate in healthcare administration from Georgetown University, and happens to be married to someone who writes the laws that govern employment discrimination in this country. David Chen's voice came through the phone speaker again, now addressing the assembled crowd. I want everyone here to understand what they've just witnessed. Dr. Richardson was racially profiled, illegally detained, and subjected to harassment for the crime of shopping while black. Officer Mitchell, I'll be filing federal civil rights charges against you personally, as well as against mall management. Brad felt his knees go weak. Federal charges. Civil rights violations. His 8-year career, his pension, his reputation, everything was crumbling around him in real time, and it was all being recorded by dozens of phones. Sir, Senator Richardson, there's been a misunderstanding, Brad said, his voice cracking with desperation. I was just doing my job, following protocol. What protocol? Angela interjected, her composure never wavering despite the chaos around her. What protocol allows you to detain a customer with a valid receipt? What protocol permits you to demand someone justify their ability to afford merchandise? What protocol gives you the right to refuse someone's phone calls? Jenny Chun, the young security guard who'd watched the entire encounter, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Senator Richardson, Dr. Richardson, I want you to know that I didn't agree with any of this. Officer Mitchell was acting on his own, and I tried to suggest we just verify the receipt. Officer Chun, James said, his voice gentler when addressing the obviously distressed young woman. I appreciate your honesty. You'll be asked to provide a statement about what you witnessed here today. Webb was already on his radio, calling for mall management and probably legal counsel. He understood that Prestige Plaza was about to become the center of a media firestorm that would require damage control far beyond his pay grade. The second CTA is coming, Angela thought to herself as she watched Brad's world collapse. This is exactly the moment viewers have been waiting for. But the look on this security guard's face when he realized he'd just physically threatened a senator's wife was absolutely priceless. But what happened next will show you exactly why you should never judge someone by their appearance. If you're enjoying watching this racist guard's world completely fall apart, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen someone's prejudice backfire this spectacularly? Because the consequences he faced will be talked about in security training for years to come. Within 24 hours, security footage of encounter had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. The hashtag #PrestigePlazaShame was trending nationally, and civil rights organizations were using the incident as a textbook example of everyday racism in upscale retail environments. Brad Mitchell was terminated that same evening, his security license revoked, and his name permanently associated with one of the most public displays of racial profiling in recent memory. The mall's parent company settled Dr. Richardson's civil rights lawsuit for an undisclosed 7-figure sum, all of which she donated to expanding the Children's Hospital's community outreach programs. Webb was demoted but kept his job after agreeing to testify about the incident and participate in new anti-discrimination training protocols. Jenny Chun became a vocal advocate for better training in recognizing and preventing racial profiling, eventually leaving security work to study civil rights law. 6 months later, Senator Richardson introduced the Angela Richardson Act, federal legislation requiring mandatory anti-bias training for all security personnel working in interstate commerce. The bill passed with bipartisan support, creating the first federal standards for preventing discrimination in retail security practices. Dr. Angela Richardson continued her work at the Children's Hospital, but also became a powerful voice for retail justice reform. She testified before Congress, spoke at university law schools, and worked with civil rights organizations to ensure that what happened to her at Prestige Plaza would be less likely to happen to other black women who didn't have a senator for a husband. And Brad Mitchell? He never worked in security again. The last anyone heard, he was driving delivery trucks and trying to rebuild his life away from any position of authority. The 8-year career he'd been so proud of was reduced to a cautionary tale told in security training seminars across the country. The custom cufflinks Angela had purchased that day became more than just a gift for her husband. They became a symbol of dignity maintained under pressure, of the power of refusing to be intimidated, and of what happens when someone finally has the authority to ensure that injustice has consequences. Angela Richardson turned a moment of racial profiling into a catalyst for nationwide security reform. Her dignified response and strategic use of both legal expertise and political platform didn't just protect her own rights. It created protections for countless others who face discrimination in everyday spaces. What's your take on this story? Do you think people with power and privilege have a responsibility to speak up when they face discrimination, knowing their voice carries more weight than others? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspectives always add new dimensions to these stories that make me think differently. If stories about dignity, justice, and people using their platforms to create real change are your thing, you'll want to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into cases like this every week, showing how ordinary moments of prejudice can become extraordinary opportunities for social progress. Next week, we're covering the case of the restaurant manager who refused to serve a homeless man until she discovered that homeless man was actually an undercover health inspector who'd been documenting discrimination complaints. Trust me, the health department's response was absolutely devastating. Until then, remember what Dr. Angela Richardson proved that day. Sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't anger or revenge. It's using your platform to ensure it never happens to someone else. The badge doesn't make the person, The person makes the badge mean something. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.